Good morning, students. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you, but I'm feeling quite unwell. Uh, I didn't just want to leave you an assignment, so I'm recording this so maybe I can help you a little bit if you were confused about anything in your reading last night. So make the most of what I'm giving you here, or maybe you don't need me quite as much, and you're finding the reading pretty straightforward. Um, you're reading, the name of the game was Murder by Joan Lowry Nixon. The assignment that I left for you yesterday was this pre-writing assignment, and what I really wanted you to think about was the importance of like having someone that you look up to and that you really admire, and someone that you would hope would be able to counsel you and give you advice about something that you really want to do, whether it's a celebrity, a scientist, a person that's an expert in their field, and you've always wanted to meet them. And what would happen if, after you met them, you were crushed to realize that they weren't who they always seemed to be, right? That our imaginations kind of like held them in this really high esteem. So I wanted you to think about who that applies to for you. And I saw in some of your responses that some of you even said, like, can I select someone that's already deceased? And of course, the purpose of this question was to help guide you through the thought of like, how would you feel to be completely broken apart by the person that you most admired hurting your feelings? And that's something that's immediately established in the first paragraph of the novel, which we'll go over. So a couple of slides that I had here for us to go over together. There's this article on Pop Crush, and there's plenty on other sites like BuzzFeed, and it's 25 celebrities who are supposedly rude to fans. And a lot of different people have recorded their interactions with different celebrities. So this one, as you see on the screen, is specifically Jennifer Lawrence. That particular article has another 24, many of whom are a little bit older or maybe outside of your age range and you wouldn't necessarily recognize. But definitely individuals who have been crushed to find out that the people they admire don't really live up to our expectations. The genre that we're studying is a murder mystery, right? So I think we all know what this is, but by definition, it's a fiction genre where the nature of an event, usually a murder or other crime, remains mysterious until the end of the story. And that will be true until chapters 16 and 17, when we finally find out what actually, who actually murdered the individual who you have not read up to yet. The murder hasn't quite happened until chapter 3 or 4. Often within a closed circle of suspects, each suspect is usually provided with a credible motive and a reasonable opportunity for committing the crime. The central character is often a detective who eventually solves the mystery by logical deduction from facts presented to the reader. And obviously our detective, our central character here, is Sam Burns. So you would have picked up on that from chapter 1. Now in chapter 1, I left you a few questions. Who is the protagonist and what is her ambition? What career does she hope to have? And we know that that's going to be Sam. Whom does Samantha Burns visit at the beginning of the novel? What's that person's name? How is she related to this person, and why is she there? How are Sam and Augustus related? What is Augustus Trevor's reaction to Sam's response visit? What does he force Sam to do? Question number 5, why is Samantha unable to return home at this time? And I noted here that this is an important aspect of the novel's setting, and you'll see in my notes that the setting is really important to understanding how the author creates suspense, atmosphere, and a general mood for the story as we're reading. So there's a feeling, an emotion, atmosphere that's somewhat creepy. We meet or are introduced by name to a couple of characters. So we're told that a character named Buck Thompson will show up. We get more details about him in chapters 2 and 3. And then we also meet Mrs. Engstrom, who is ordered by Augustus to do something for him with our protagonist. What does Samantha learn about the sleeping arrangements of Aunt Thea and her husband? I think that it's just a passing line when you're going through the reading, but you kind of start to wonder about Thea's relationship with Augustus given their sleeping arrangements. Now, the whole story takes place on Catalina Island. That is not a fictional place. Everything about this novel is designed to make it seem like it's actually a real environment, a world that you can encompass, and that makes us feel a little bit more attached to the world and more interested in what we're reading. So Catalina Island is off of Los Angeles. You can only access it. It's an island, so you can only access it by boat. There's a couple of images here that I wanted you to see, right? So you can kind of just get a sense of what it's like as a shore, and the fact that the first chapter and the second chapter really focus on the weather, and you can imagine what it'd be like to be on an island like this in the middle of a storm. And then I added this third image just to show its isolation, because the isolating nature of the island is part of what helps to create some of that suspense in the story. Setting, the effective atmosphere. So I really want you, as you're reading, to pay attention to how the castle is described by Sam. She's herself a writer, so she's really good at describing everything and how it makes her feel. And she even makes note of the fact that she writes about her environment in her journal. And obviously, considering the world, how would you feel if you were locked into this space without your parents? She's alone, she's away from her parents, she doesn't even have access to her parents, right? Her parents are away, so she's kind of stuck on the island, which becomes an important part of establishing her isolation and loneliness. In chapter 2, some of the central questions and what you'll be working on for me today. Describe the room that is given to Samantha. Describe its location, size, furnishings, and view to the outside. It's really important that you're aware of this, because her room, especially by chapters 4 and 5, becomes a central location or setting that becomes really important in our understanding who the murderer might be. Pages 12 and 13 in your book tell what happened after Samantha landed at the airport, who met her there, and how did they travel to the island. Kind of already mentioned that to you. Describe the setting in detail, especially at the bottom of page 13 and top of 14. What mood does the setting create? Sam sees a burnished gold vase on a pedestal which was tucked into the deep angle of the landing. Who identifies what this object actually is for her, and what is it? This seemingly simple vase, which turns out to be an urn, a burial urn, will be an important part throughout all 17 chapters of the novel. So every time there's a reference to it, you're going to want to give it a little bit of attention and ask yourself, why am I being told the things that I am, right? It's a mystery novel, so we're also trying to figure it out along the way. Question number 5. Augustus had told Samantha he was hosting a house party for the weekend. Who is the first famous person who comes to the island? Describe her. Why did Laura Reed, the person from the previous question, say that she had come to the island? What were her feelings about being there? And then question number 7 is, who is Darlene Barkholter? For this particular set of 2 chapters, the words that you should eventually look up are sneer, detect, immense, and impulsive. You're going to write their definitions, and then we'll also produce some sentences for them. Now, I'm going to just go over a few of the highlights of the first and second chapter, telling you what you should have already focused on and what you can focus on moving forward. So right from the very beginning, this is on the digital copy that I've shared with all of you. It's on Blackbaud under the announcements listing. If you want to read a digital copy, if you ever forget your book, you'll always have a copy available to you. So in the very beginning, we get the I, which is Samantha Burns, and we see in this opening paragraph that Augustus's character is immediately established, right? The fact that he has gargoyle eyes, overlarge lenses, shiny bald head, stoop-shouldered ball, he snaps. Everything about him seems immediately as like someone that you would not want to meet. Seems almost villainous, or just someone that isn't necessarily attractive, either in appearance or behavior. And we get this feeling from Sam that it really was terrible, that Augustus Trevor, who's her uncle, had always been someone that she really looked up to, and he had socialized with kings and presidents. That'll show up later. But he was just this older, scowling, mean-tempered person, to the point where she begins to sweat, to the point that she stammers when she introduces herself. The fact that he snaps, and he will continuously snap. Again, the descriptions of him, the characterization, right? To borrow our literary terminology. His face was crinkling like a dark purple prune. That, again, that's not positive characterization. There's something very negative about it, like crinkling, right? His face is getting pruny, purplish. Uh, she tells him all about her dream to be a writer, how she's going to be a writer, how she had submitted writing to him. But again, all that we get from him are snaps and screeches. He is, just kind of like tells her that she should just go home. And we get this really important detail here that I have in blue, which is connected to the setting, I suppose, that she's stuck there. No one's home. For 2 weeks, she needs to be there. And there really just isn't any means for her to get away from their current situation. So we know that this is a murder mystery, and we need to have a reason why a child would be allowed to stay in this very dangerous space, and so that it makes sense. That's all explained through this little bit of detail about how her parents are away. We get a very important plot detail here about how he's hosting a house party. This whole story is centered around the people that he invites over to his home. And, the sad part about Sam's interaction with him is that, she really sees him as someone that she needs to be great. She thinks she needs someone outside of herself in order to become the person that she wants to be. And I think by the end of the novel, we can suspect that that's not what the story wants us to think. We want her to believe that she's more independent, that she doesn't need anyone else. We get told about the first person that shows up, Buck Thompson, and that he's a network sportscaster. That he will be showing up, and that he's currently slated to be in the room that she was initially assigned to by her Aunt Thea. We get a lot more detail about him in the next couple of chapters, so I'll leave it to that. Again, we get a sneer of disgust in her direction, and then we get Mrs. Engstrom, who's a housekeeper. Now, we might want to just consider that, she's a minor character, but Mrs. Engstrom will be present throughout the course of the entire novel, and she's a lot more important than we might want to imagine early on. So do pay attention to every time that Mrs. Engstrom is mentioned in the novel. Sam gets basically placed in a different room, and her room, which had been the red room, will now be like the tower room. Not going to read through everything for you. We get a description about how one accesses her room. So there's a narrow, curving flight of stairs. The stairs are steep. Requires a little bit of work to get up to her room. And then we're also going to find out that there's a very important part to this room, which repeats over and over again, which is that there is a key required to get into and out of the room. So we'll see that key show up quite a bit throughout the story. And we'll just like we do with the vase. So every time you see this large brass key mentioned, I want you to give it a little bit of love and attention and think about what it might mean and what it might symbolize within the story, right? Keys open and close doors. And then the last part of this first chapter, the view is marred by the bars set into the stone, and she acknowledges what we should have already done ourselves, which is that she is in prison. She's in this tower, and it is like a prison. She has this beautiful thing to look out upon, but there's these prison bars. To some extent, she's being set up as a person that needs to be saved, some kind of young princess, but that's not the case at all. We're going to find out that she is actually the heroine who everyone will turn to for help. For chapter 2, which you're reading, I'll give you some quick details about it. Here's that key again, and I mentioned here in my notes that maybe this is a symbol. But she realizes that with that key, someone could lock her into her room. But she also kind of tells herself, nah, who here is going to do that, right? There's nothing to suggest that this should be a dangerous place. But again, it establishes the fact that she's isolated, but also that she could possibly be in a position of danger, right? She's separated from everybody. You need stairs to get up to her room, whereas everyone else's rooms are on the same hallway. And then there's a key that could lock her in. But this is also a key that she can use to lock people out. Everything that you'll see in the section in blue is a flashback. And what we learn through this flashback is that Sam's father and mother are not really big fans of Augustus, and they weren't very encouraging about her going to attend this or make this trip out to the islands to see Augustus. There's a mention here of cribbage, and it shows up a couple of times. Not really important detail, but in case you didn't know what it was, a card game for 2 to 4 players in which the objective is to play so that the value of one's cards played reaches exactly 15 or 31. We learned that Sam, is from Nevada, and there's just a mention of Robert Redford and the different people that Augustus hung out with. And Robert Redford, at the time that the novel was written, would have been a very big actor. We find out that the reason why she wants to go and see Augustus so badly is because she believes that he is such a great writer that he can offer her help to become a great writer herself. And a question that I propose here, why does it matter more if we do something in person, right? Mom and Dad just didn't understand how much it would mean to be guided by Augustus Trevor. We always feel like if we have the person in front of us that the meaning will be much greater. To some extent, right, I'm trying to be in person with you right now by doing this recording rather than leaving you by yourself. Hopefully this establishes our relationship a little bit more closely. But there's also a good chance that you could do this completely without me, right? Another setting alert. Our home is on the opposite side of the island and rather remote from the Avalon area. So again, we're reminded that this murder is going to take place in this house and there's no one around. And that's really important for the story because we keep wondering, why can't anyone show up there? We get some characterization of Thea, her aunt. Everything about her was soft, her pale gray blonde hair, her light untanned skin to her eyes that look like reflections of the washed out blue of the sky. There's something almost godlike about Thea when compared to her somewhat ugly in appearance and behaviored uncle, Augustus Trevor. She is directly connected, so Thea is her actual aunt, and Augustus is her relative by marriage. One of the questions I propose, she will mention Darlene Barkholder a few times throughout the course of the story. That's just her close friends, and she keeps imagining telling Darlene about all the things that she has going on, especially at the beginning as these different celebrities start to show up at the house. She hopes to become a famous writer. She hopes that she'll have a beautiful home. But she describes the house, and I told you to focus on the setting. The set of a Halloween horror movie. Ugly stone castle sat alone on a scrubby hill covered with a thick tangle of sage and short golden brown grasses under wind-twisted oak trees. This is more like an Edgar Allan Poe story. It's terrifying. It's isolating. It's like a short horror story. So unlike, these beautiful picture postcard views of the sea, the house doesn't really have that same effect. It faces the other side of the island. The back to the present now. She had been all of this had been a flashback, and now we've got her back into the present. She's talking about the house being cluttered with museum-like stuff, heavily framed paintings, wood carvings of animals and people, all kinds of big and little statues, glazed pottery. But it's like a museum. It's something kind of like old, antiquated, creepy, that for a young girl like her should be something that's not really kind of like what she would have been expecting, right? It's not like a really cool home. Here's that gold vase that I mentioned before. So that is a pedestal vase that she sees, and that will, again, it's described to her as being a burial urn. So you can look up what a burial urn is. I also have it in my slides for you, and it'll be under my chapter 3 slides. And the person that is basically comes together is Walter. He's one of the other butlers or people at the home that attend to Augustus and to Thea. We have the mention of a third room. So we had the tower room, which is where Sam is. Red room, where Buck Thompson is going to be assigned. And then there's the sun room, which is the room that is Thea's room. Thea's room is separate from the room in which Augustus sleeps, and we can see kind of like the symbolic nature of the sun room being a room full of light. And we've already seen that the descriptions of Thea are very godlike, so it's interesting that she would be associated with this light. So you'll read along, giving you some definitions: puzzled, confused, bewildered, for bemused. The first person that shows up is named Laura Reed, who is a movie star. And Sam is immediately kind of like caught off guard by her appearance. She doesn't look the way she would have expected to. But she also starts to tell us some of the reasons why she is there. Um, and basically says that she's not really happy. She feels bullied to have been brought to the house. Thea explains that Augustus is hot-headed when things aren't going his way, and that he had gout and arthritis that haven't helped his disposition, which means that basically he's in pain, so he acts like kind of a big meanie because he doesn't feel well. Here's the references to she doesn't dress the way that she wanted, so this is kind of why I gave you the initial prompt. She expected her to be this big movie star and to look a particular way. She expects her to have a ton of money. Her last two movies didn't do well. I call this the tea because Sam's getting all of the good news about all the news, all the gossip about what's going on. But she was very simply dressed, and that's not what she necessarily expected. She also describes her voice as being mousy, and that she murmured, right? So she's talking in a much lower tone, almost like that she's worried about something. There's an odd expression in her eyes. Her mind was somewhere else. She was not in a happy place. She was nervous. So we're immediately getting a sense from the other characters that things aren't particularly well, and that Laura's not happy to be there. We get our first kind of like inciting clue here, our inciting incident, which means that the plot is going to start to rise. When we're told that she gets a letter about a game that she would be one of the players of, and she's told that if she doesn't take part, that she would regret it, and she sees it as a threat. She doesn't consider herself a friend with Augustus. It's something she whispered, and she says, "I'd hardly say we were friends." So what Augustus Trevor had written to Laura, "You'll soon regret it if you don't take part," definitely sounds like a threat to Sam, and that's where the chapter ends before we get to chapter 3. All right, so with that, you should be able to answer all the questions, and I hope I have you up to speed until I am back in school. Good luck to you all. Send me an email if you have any questions or if you need any help with anything. I'll try to be at my computer to help you out. All right, bye.